Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you all are well. Last week, we learned about Hitler's risky move through the Ardennes forest, and of course, his pettiness at Compiègne. Hitler has the entire continent of Europe. Now, this is when he starts making mistakes, and luckily for us, he made a series of absolutely horrible mistakes that would actually, in the end, lose them the war. So we're going to focus on 3 of his major mistakes, and I like to call those mistakes boats, bombs, boots. And you'll see why I do that in a minute, because it's easy for you to remember that. Boats, bombs, boots. As you have seen through watching the videos on YouTube and Netflix, World War II in color, you will have seen how basically the French and the British were trapped at this little town in northern France called Dunkirk. There was between 300,000 and 400,000 men stuck on that beach. There was nowhere for them to go. They all thought that they were going to be strafed, that they were going to be destroyed by the Germans. Now, what happens next is really, really mysterious. No one really knows why Hitler hesitates, but he does. For 3 or 4 days, he really doesn't move against these troops. In England at the time, the Prime Minister, the new Prime Minister, his name is Sir Winston Churchill. We're going to talk about him in a second. He orders every boat, I mean that's from dinghies to tugboats to ships of all sorts, to go across the English Channel, rescue these men on the beach, and bring them home. It is one of the largest evacuations. Hey, isn't that Harry Styles? Anyway, these men are saved. They are rescued. And it really turns out to be Hitler's first mistake, because all these men will come and fight another day a few years later. Boats, ladies and gentlemen. Hitler's first mistake, boats. Now, we talked about the Prime Minister, Winston Churchill. Who is this guy? He was a very strong leader and very opinionated. And in the past, his opinions would get him into trouble. In fact, people said he had one of the quickest wits. And if you Google it, my goodness, you can see it for yourself. He has 1,000 quotes, and they're very, very clever. One time, a woman he did not like or care for too much in Parliament turned to him and said, "Winston, if you were my husband, I'd poison your tea." Without even missing a beat, Churchill turned to her and said, "Madame, if you are my wife, I'd drink it." So you can see, he's quite a sharp-witted man. This is one of the most famous pictures of Winston Churchill. It was actually taken in Ottawa, Ontario, of all places. And the reason he looks so cranky is because the photographer, his name is Karsh at the time, Churchill was smoking his cigar normally. And in fact, at that moment, he had just addressed the Canadian Parliament, and he was in a great and affable mood. Well, Karsh didn't think that really captured the essence of the man, so as he was holding his cigar, Karsh walked up to him and ripped the cigar from his hand and snapped this iconic photo. And you can see the grumpiness, the steely determination that Churchill always had. Well, after Dunkirk, after the fall of France, Hitler turns his attention to the last obstacle in Europe, which is, of course, England itself. So Hitler attacks his next target. He calls this Operation Sea Lion, the invasion of England, the invasion of Britain. Now, this is Hitler's second major mistake, and we call this bombs. Why? Because Hitler focused all his bombing really on London. You see, he wanted to break the will of the British. He wanted to destroy the morale of the British people. But Churchill and the Brits, they stayed strong. And in fact, instead of bombing the military targets like he was supposed to, he was petty, just like at Compiègne, and he wanted to destroy those Brits. Well, the Brits rose up and were defiant. And after several months of the Blitz on London, as it's called, the Battle of Britain, even though the Royal Air Force was outnumbered, they staved off, they pushed away this attack, and Hitler, for the first time, had to accept defeat. He didn't mind much because he just basically brushed it off and said, well, so what? So England didn't fall. I'm going to turn to my next target. So we call that bombs. Boats, bombs. Hitler's third mistake? Well, it will be the most decisive. This is his decision to invade Russia. Now, before I go any further, I have to tell you a little history because it's something I left out last week. Remember, we learned about the Blitzkrieg on Poland, that Germany on September 1st, 1939 attacked Poland. But I didn't tell you about Russia. You see, Russia, or the USSR as it was called, was absolutely the #1 enemy to Nazi Germany. And all through the 30s, they had propaganda and hate messages for each other. Well, right before Hitler invaded Poland, he reached out and made a deal with Russia, his worst enemy. The world was shocked. They couldn't believe it. Why are these two people, these two countries who hate each other so much, making a deal? Well, Stalin knew that he had to buy time. And Hitler did not want a war on two fronts like in 1914. So they made a deal. They divided Poland between East and West. Nazi Germany got Western Poland, and Russia, or USSR, got Eastern Poland. It left Hitler free to go west, and that's where he took France. But in 1941, June of 1941 to be exact, Hitler turns eastward. You see, all through the 30s, Hitler's been speaking about a very interesting word. It's called Lebensraum. And Lebensraum means living space. He kept promising the German people that he would expand the empire eastward. That's the Ukraine and Poland and Russia. And that's exactly what he did. In Operation Barbarossa, as it is called, he attacked the major centers of Russia, which is Leningrad, Moscow, and Stalingrad. And he almost made it too. But, of course, his pride and his arrogance, even though his generals kept telling him it is not a good idea to invade Russia, he did it. The problem is, he did not outfit his troops. You see, he felt that he would get there before the winter. But the distance between Germany and Moscow are thousands of kilometers. The leadership in Russia, being very clever at that time, said, we are going to destroy everything between Germany and Moscow. That means we are going to destroy farms. We are going to poison wells. It is called the scorched earth policy. Russians destroyed their own farmland and animals just so that the Germans would have to bring in supplies from a great distance. And it proved to be the right thing to do. As Russians retreated, the Germans were on their blitz, but they got too far in, and one of the most coldest winters, 1941-42, hit Russia. And the Germans were not prepared. And in that year, they froze. Boots, ladies and gentlemen, boots. They did not have proper winter wear, and they froze to death. Hitler's 3 mistakes: boats, bombs, boots. The actual turning point of the war comes in a town named after the leader of the USSR, of Russia. His name, of course, Joseph Stalin. And Joseph Stalin was much like Hitler, paranoid, a megalomaniac, an egomaniac, and he had to beat Hitler some way. So as I said, he instituted this policy of scorched earth, destroy everything in Russia and just move east and let the Germans come in to the point they freeze to death. But one of the most decisive battles happened in Stalingrad. The Germans had taken the half of the city, and it was up to the Russians. It was the last stronghold in southeast Russia. And Stalin said, you must hold this at all costs. And the Russians did, at a terrible cost. They brought down conscripts. They brought down young men, as you will see in the movie clip, Enemy at the Gates, and it was a mass slaughter. You see, the Russians basically said, We want you to run at the Germans. We don't have enough bullets and guns, so one guy, you take the gun, and the other guy, you take the bullets. And when the one guy dies, the other guy takes the bullet or the gun, whoever dies. And it was a brutal, brutal conflict. Also, the Russians were instructed to fire on their own people. Russian commanders said, charge, and if anyone was to retreat, the Russians would shoot them. That's how brutal this war was. Well, legend has it that a young man from the Ural Mountains, his name is Vasily Zaitsev, rose up and became one of the most famous snipers in all of history. They made a movie about him called Enemy at the Gate, starring Jude Law. I'm going to show you a couple clips on YouTube. It's worth a check out. And he basically shot over 200 Germans and demoralized the Germans. The Germans lost Stalingrad, and this in 1942-43 was the beginning of the end for Nazi Germany. So those are Hitler's 3 mistakes. They're in alphabetical order, so you can remember which one comes first, second, and third. Boats, bombs, boots. I want you to look again at World War II in color, episodes 3 and 4, because it goes through mistake number 2 and mistake number 3. And if you have the time, and if this is not, you don't have to, but one of the really best movies to show the mind of Winston Churchill and what he was up against and what the British people faced in the Battle of Britain. It is called, of course, The Darkest Hour. And you should check that out. It's on Netflix, though, so you have to have Netflix. But again, that's just optional, ladies and gentlemen. So take care. Have a great day. And remember, study hard, don't panic, and be well.